And a hush falls over the crowd. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Shelter Rock on this United Nations Sunday. You will see our chancel table is arrayed with globes, and we have a banner which Chris will explain a little bit later. I'm Reverend Ned White, the interim senior minister here at the congregation, serving with Reverend Jennifer Brower, who is on sabbatical for 6 months, Reverend Natalie Fenimore, and Nancy Reed McKee, both of whom are in the religious education wing today. The error in the order of service is mine, not Nancy's. So be nice to Nancy, be cruel to me. That would be good. We have a Unitarian Universalist Cafe after the service, and you are most welcome. If you are a newcomer here, and this is your first time, please go to the membership welcome desk and pick up a voucher for a free lunch. And we would be delighted to host you as our guests for UU Cafe today. There are a couple of program opportunities for you at this afternoon. There's a new member orientation at 1 p.m. in room 14 if you're interested in membership in the congregation. I think we have 27 people signed up for that, which is great. We have end of life choices in the Beach Ballroom at 1:30. And the Shelter Rock Forum speaker, Fawzia Kufi, member of the Parliament of Afghanistan and advocate for rights of women and children, will be in this room at 1:30. We are grieving 3 deaths here in the congregation. Adelaide Mosca, age 94, a mother of UUCSR member Maria Mosca, passed away peacefully surrounded by her 4 children on October 11th. Longtime member Yvonne Kenny, aged 89, died on October 18th. And I believe a memorial service will be held this next Sunday morning at 10 a.m. That's what was announced to the congregation, so I hope that is correct. Dottie Prunhuber, who died in September, had a memorial service here yesterday, and the flowers on the chancel table are from that service. She was an indefatigable champion of the United Nations and United Nations peacekeeping and United Nations community and international relations. So we are honored to be able to recognize her today. And it was her persistent insistence that resulted in Chris Antal saying yes to come to preach today. Anybody who knew Dottie knew that if she asked you to do something and she asked you again and again, ultimately you would say yes. We're delighted to have you here. The nominating committee is looking for 2 members to serve on the Housing Board and 1 on the Beach Board of Governors. So please contact Tony Logue if you might consider serving yourself or if you have recommendations of people that would be good to serve. Adult programs of interest this week include Haiku Being in the Moment, flowing with the seasons on Tuesday, the Soulful Small Group, bringing together elements of small group ministry and Soulful Sundown on Friday, the Death Cafe to help people make the most of their finite lives next Sunday afternoon. All of these are details in the order of service. There's a social justice opportunity, Marches for Climate Justice, on Saturday in New York City and on Long Island. So if you are interested in that, please pick this flyer up in the lobby. There's a worship opportunity next Sunday morning, peace and meditation at 8:30 a.m. in the RE Wing Chapel. Time for meditation, reflection on peace, and simple singing with facilitators Cello da Silva and Nancy Reed McKee. For the week after this coming week, circle on your calendars to mark the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther launching the Protestant Reformation. Our own Bob Nuxall will offer a dramatic telling of Martin Luther's life and theology. Tuesday the 31st, that's Halloween, at 4 p.m. at Hadley House, Wednesday, November 1st, that's All Saints' Day, at 7 p.m. in the chapel. We welcome back today two friends, our UN Sunday preacher, the Reverend Dr. Chris Antal, who serves the UU congregation at Rock Tavern in Orange County, New York. He's also a staff chaplain in the Department of Veterans Affairs and currently spends 2 days in Philadelphia at the VA Medical Center. And George Mann, singer, songwriter, activist, who joins us once again to offer music to feed our souls. I invite you now, as is our custom, to greet one another warmly.
This is a song I wrote about 10 years ago after seeing the movie The Ground Truth, a documentary which followed some of our veterans coming home from the wars and how difficult it was for them to readjust. And at one point in the film, one of the great guys says, you know, every day I'm chipping away at this wall I built up around me in order to get back to the person I was for my friends and the family and the people who knew me. And that was all I needed to write this song called I'm Chipping Away at This War. Well, time just about run out on me a dozen times that I could see, but I'm still standing, yeah, I'm standing here. I shut my mouth and I did my time, I put my body on the line, another pawn in this war of fear. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away. Chipping away, I'm chipping away at this wall in front of me. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away at this wall. My feet are tired and my hands don't work, my mind's a mess, my body hurts, but I'm still standing while I'm sitting here. So much to be sorry for. I've seen enough for 100 wars, but I've seen nothing to justify my being there. Sing with me. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away at this war inside of me. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away. Chipping away, I'm chipping away at this war. I'm a soldier, I'm a killer, and I'll carry that with me all the way home. Well, time just about run out on me. time won't erase memories of all the faces in my dreams. And every time that I get scared, I curse the men who sent me there, never saw the things I've seen. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away at this war inside of me. I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away, I'm chipping away at this war, at this war.
Thank you, George. We'll hear more from George later in the service. For our opening words, I invite you to join me in reading number 591, which Reverend Chris has selected for us today. Reading number 591, I call that church free. And these are words of James Luther Adams, one of our preeminent 20th century theologians, Unitarian Universalist. Let's read this responsively. I call that church free which enters into covenant with the ultimate source of existence.
That's sustaining and transforming power, not made with human hands.
It binds together families and generations, protecting against the idolatry of any human claim to absolute truth or authority.
This covenant is charter and responsibility and joy of worship in the face of death as well as life.
I call that church free which brings individuals into a caring, trusting fellowship.
That protects and nourishes their integrity and spiritual freedom. It bears belong to the Church Universal.
It is open to insight and conscience from every source. It bursts through rigid tradition, giving rise to new and living language, to new and broader fellowship.
It is a pilgrim church, a servant church, on an adventure of the Spirit.
The goal is the prophethood and priesthood of all believers, the one for the liberty of prophesying, the other for the ministry of healing.
It aims to find unity in diversity under the promptings of the Spirit, that bloweth where it listeth, and maketh all things new.
Our chalice lighting words are from former Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. Each morning we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. Now if you will turn in your hymnals to hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses, and rise in body or spirit as we sing this together. Please remain standing as we say together our words of affirmation and sing our song of affirmation, words for which are printed in the order of service. Saying together, love is the doctrine of this congregation, the quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. This do we affirm and covenant with each other. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of faith and hope arise. Let peace, goodwill, on earth be sung through every land, on every tongue. Please be seated. piece the choir just performed is from Songs of Sanctuary by Welsh composer Carl Jenkins. It is our hope that this is a sanctuary for those of us who are here this morning, always a sanctuary where you can come home and feel the peace of this place. In a world of constant change, we come together each week to regain our bearings and to renew our sense of resilience and of hope. We also take stock of our many blessings and open our hearts to share from whatever bounty we have enjoyed, to ensure that this congregation may continue its ministries of teaching, of service, and of beauty. I ask the ushers to come forward now for this morning's offering.
This song is about Vietnam veterans coming to a conference to help the young veterans understand post-traumatic stress disorder. It comes out of the Welcome Home Project, which in 2008 brought about 30 veterans together for a week of discussions and healing. And they published a book about it and a film called The Welcome. And there's a poem in there that a young veteran writes to one of the Vietnam vets saying, "Thanks for coming back for us." And that's what inspired this song called Streams of Gold. I was walking through a valley, bloody boots upon my feet, feeling beaten, feeling tired. I was falling to my knees when I came upon a clearing, found someone been there before. As I walked into the open, up ahead of me I saw someone coming down the mountain, waving to me through the rain. We looked back and saw you coming. He said, "Let me explain. There'll be fields of plenty, there'll be streams of gold, there'll be smiling, healthy children. I am told, though I realize you must walk alone. I will walk this trail beside you to your home." 40 years ago we started as we came home from the war. And like you, we hadn't figured out what we were fighting for. Call it duty, call it honor, love of country or revenge. We have seen enough of killing, we just want some peace again. There'll be fields plenty, there'll be streams of gold, there'll be smiling, healthy children. I am told, though I realize you must walk alone. I will walk this trail beside you to your home. Now I'm still walking through that valley, getting closer to my home. I'm so glad you're with me, brother. Now I know I'm not alone. I see other men and women, all the wounded from this war. We will carry one another till we all get through that door. There'll be fields of plenty, there'll be streams of gold, there'll be smiling, happy children you can hold. Though I realize we must walk alone. We will walk this trail together. We will walk this trail together. We will walk this trail together till we're home.
I never met William Mahidi, but our paths have parallels. He joined the Army as a chaplain and went into the war zone, as I did. Although he went to Vietnam, I went to Afghanistan. And after serving in the Army, William Mahidi found his call to ministry among veterans and was instrumental in starting the vet centers, which now operate around the country. About a decade after his involvement in that work, he wrote a book called Out of the Night, The Spiritual Journey of Vietnam Veterans. I'd like to read from that now. It's been a very influential book for me. This comes from a section called The Vets as Prophets. Biblical prophecy did not emphasize the foretelling of future events. Rather, the prophets were those who spoke the word of God to the people of Israel, reproving them for their infidelities against God's covenant and reminding them that God had called them to a moral life. War, injustice, and oppression were grist for the prophets' utterances. Vietnam vets, though obviously not aware of any divinely given mission to society, speak a word of prophecy in their collective story, and especially in their spiritual journey to a nation that purports to base its existence on biblical teachings. The nation that believes itself to be morally correct in all that it does would do well to learn from the bitter anguish of those who fell from grace while doing its bidding. The Vietnam soldiers forced America to face the fact that war is primarily a moral issue. It is really a series of individual moral acts, some good, some evil, but all partaking in the sinfulness of war itself. The myth of glorious war rings hollow after Vietnam. War in the cause of virtue makes as much sense now as does sex for the sake of virginity. Sergeant Stryker and Rambo still flicker across our screens, but after Vietnam, they are as real as Alice in Wonderland. I believe high-tech killing and the immoral process employed by politicians, planners, and the senior military constitute a web of delusion that continues to mask the nature of war. In Vietnam, the combat soldier alone saw death up close, and his story alone tells the moral truth. The impact of Vietnam for the veterans who actually fought, psychic stress, moral confusion, and the dark night of the spirit are the true costs of war. The voice of the veteran is raised in protest against the prevailing currents of our culture. It unmasks our delusions. It is a voice of prophecy we fail to heed at our peril. The vets remind us that we also sit in the shadow of darkness, imprisoned by our own moral confusion and stress, each in our own private space, immersed in our personal concerns with little relationship to community. The voice of the vets is a call to discover a deeper ethic, a richer way of life. It is a voice of healing.
Come to that part of our service where we invite those who would light candles of joy or sorrow, of concerns or celebrations, to come forward to either of our two candle boxes. Let us enter into that place of meditation and prayer. O God, lover of peace, we come together in this house of prayer and praise on this United Nations Sunday, full of longing for peace. We long for peace in our hearts, our busy, troubled, angry, generous hearts. May we make time each day simply to be still, to meditate, to open our hearts to the peace that is there, always there, beneath the tumult. We long for peace in our families, our overscheduled, frantic, sometimes feuding, sometimes forgiving families. Make us bold to speak to one another more words of affirmation than words of criticism. In our families, help us discern the love that is there, always there, beneath the tumult. We long for peace in the workplace, that stressful, competitive, challenging place where we spend so much of our time and expend so much of our energy. In these days of economic distress, help us support one another in work and out of work. In the workplace, help us discern the goodwill that is there, always there, beneath the tumult. We long for peace in our nation, our divided, stratified, idealistic nation. Give us realism in analyzing the social and political systems that imprison us and courage in effecting positive change. In our nation, help us discern the commitment to justice that is there, always there, beneath the tumult. And finally, O God, we long for peace in our world, our war-torn, fractious, beautiful world. On this weekend, we remember with a mixture of gratitude and grief those who have died in warfare down through the ages, and those whose daily lives are shaped by war. Especially in these days of geopolitical conflict, help us discern the power of negotiation and compromise that is there, always there, beneath the tumult. O God, take all our longings and make us instruments of your peace. So may it be. Shalom. Blessed be. Insha'Allah. Aho. Shanti. Amen.
Well, for the record, Dottie Prunhuber only needed to invite me once. No persistence required. Latifah and Colin Woodhouse have brought a very special guest, and I think it would be appropriate just for us to acknowledge our guests. Would you like to introduce them, Latifah? Well, I, for one, am glad to hear that the U.S. has a strategic plan for Afghanistan. I'm glad to be back at Shelter Rock. Especially, I'm honored and privileged to be with you on United Nations Sunday and this special service in honor of Dottie. I last saw Dottie at the United Nations Spring Seminar, and we worked together at that seminar to construct this quilt. This is a memorial quilt. It's actually a smaller version of a 36-panel quilt, of which there are now a dozen in circulation. Each panel memorializes a person killed by a U.S. drone strike. So this was a work of collaborative art as well as public witness at the spring seminar. And it travels with me, and I use it as others use the quilts to raise awareness about the human cost of our expeditionary warfare. Dottie invited me here in an email in May, said she was very touched by the spring seminar. Were there others at the spring seminar this year? No. I'm not sure exactly what part touched her. We addressed disarmament. My keynote presentation focused on nuclear weapons and also armed drones. I also brought to the presentation these. These are my potassium iodide tablets. Did you bring yours? I don't have enough to go around. And if you don't know, this is for radiation emergencies. You know, if a bomb hits New York City, out here in Long Island, you'll probably have time to take these, if you have them. So I carry these with me to keep me aware and in touch with the danger of the present moment. So on one level, this is a message this morning about veterans, patience, penitents, prophets, and I'll reflect on how at different times and different ages, veterans have played all of these roles. But you would be wrong to think that this is a message only for veterans, or a message about how you can help veterans. In fact, the approach and the intent I have here is to reframe the conversation that is often in the public in the United States about helping the veterans, the disabled veterans, the poor veterans, and asking maybe a different question of how can the veterans help us? How can the veterans help deliver us from our delusions, our disengagement, our apathy, our indifference? Tuesday is United Nations Day, the start of Disarmament Week, which began in 1978 as a call to abandon the use of force in international relations and stop the arms race and work for disarmament. When I was with you last here at Shelter Rock, I spoke about nuclear disarmament, described a recent pilgrimage I went on to Hiroshima, and I screamed. You may remember. I'm not going to scream today, or at least I don't think I am. I might, it depends on how I feel, just to keep you on the edge of your seats. But if we begin to contemplate the moment we're in, many of us may feel like screaming. I'd actually recommend it, maybe not now, but find some time. Since I was last with you, we do have something to celebrate, the treaty banning nuclear weapons. So far, 53 states have signed, 3 have ratified this ban treaty. And the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICANN, recently received the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to bring the treaty ban into existence. We can hold that celebration, that gratitude, that pride, together with appropriate embarrassment and shame for the United States' role in undermining and trying to sabotage the whole process. Today I'm wearing a blue badge. I'm one of 4 representatives to the United Nations of Veterans for Peace, USA. On Friday, I went to my first event as a badge holder. The topic was addressing armed UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, next steps for the international community. I found most of the experience quite frustrating, even though I was in the room with people I generally like, from Amnesty International and Pax Christi. The frustration for me was that most of the discussion was around the so-called proper use of this new technology. And when it came time for questions, I questioned the assumption that there can be such a thing as proper use of targeted killing with armed drones. I also called out the panelists, 2 of them, for conflating legal with proper. I said just because something is legal does not mean it's right. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we ought to. Those are important distinctions that we as a religious community bring to these conversations. A moral voice, a voice of conscience. In the midst of Disarmament Week, we find ourselves commemorating Reformation Day. Reformation Sunday, October 29th, is a commemoration of Martin Luther. 5 centuries have come and gone since he nailed his 95 Theses to the door at the church in Wittenberg, Germany, igniting the Protestant Reformation. Luther was called before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V at a diet called the Diet of Worms, a formal meeting held in a city south of Frankfurt, and confronted on his dissent. Luther famously responded, "I cannot and will not recant, because acting against one's conscience is neither safe nor sound, God help me. Popularly, this is remembered as Here I Stand, So Help Me God. Unitarian Universalists have roots in the Protestant Reformation. These days, we like to elevate Martin Luther King Jr. Now, King Sr. was born Michael King and named his son, King Jr., Michael as well. But in 1934, when King Jr. was just 5 years old, King Sr. went to Berlin. He joined the World Baptist Alliance Conference and discovered Martin Luther was so moved by this German Christian that he changed his own name and then changed the name of his son. King Jr. died before Disarmament Week came into existence. But when he was alive, he addressed the themes: disarmament, strengthening the United Nations. In 1964, responding to the military buildup in Vietnam, King addressed an audience at Western Michigan State University and called for a new organization, the International Association for Creative Maladjustment. He said the members of this organization ought to be as maladjusted as the prophet Amos. He called for maladjustment to the madness of militarism, maladjustment to the self-defeating effects of physical violence, and warned that the alternative to strengthening the United Nations and disarming the whole world may well be a civilization plunged into the abyss of annihilation. 4 years later, King stood at the Riverside pulpit in New York City and criticized the United States as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. He implored U.S. citizens to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high ground of firm dissent based on the mandates of conscience. Well, 5 years ago, I took a stand, acting in accordance with my conscience, while I was in Afghanistan serving as an Army chaplain. I was, in some ways, a penitent. I preached a confession. I tried to purge myself. I voiced dissent, submitting to the mandates of my conscience. I drew strength to stand from the likes of Martin Luther and King Jr., but also from our own statement of conscience, creating peace. We repudiate aggressive and preventive wars, the disproportionate use of force, covert wars, and targeting that includes high risk to civilians. That's a quote from our Creating Peace statement of conscience. Well, I saw all of that in Afghanistan, and I felt it was mine to do to repudiate it. I spoke out against preventive war. I spoke out against the disproportionate use of force. I spoke out against covert war, and I spoke out against innocent and unnecessary death. As a consequence, I was investigated, formally reprimanded, and released from active duty. I stayed in until last year when I resigned my office as a commissioned officer in a public letter. I told the commander-in-chief I refused to serve as an Empire chaplain. Now, when I got back from Afghanistan, I went to the VA and met a psychologist I told her I had moral injury. She determined my problem was an adjustment disorder. I told her I had experienced a betrayal of what's right, that I had borne witness to acts that violate my core values as a human being, as a minister. I told her I learned about unnecessary killing, including the killing of Momina Bibi, a 67-year-old grandmother killed October 24th on United Nations Day in 2012. Just a month after I arrived in Afghanistan, she was blown up while picking okra in her garden, killed by a Hellfire missile from a US drone. 5 years later, to my knowledge, there's been no acknowledgement by the US government of this tragedy, no reparations, no justice, no respect. The notion that war has a moral cost is not new. Bernard Verkamp did a study called The Moral Treatment of Returning Warriors in early and medieval times. And he lays out in the first chapter how the church imposed penance upon returning warriors. Fascinating. Imposed penance. One of the most significant documents of this era, the Hastings Articles, came out of a synod of bishops who imposed a set of penances upon all ranks of the army that had fought at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Listen to some of these articles. Anyone who knows that he killed a man in the great battle must do penance for a year for each man that he killed. Anyone who wounded a man and does not know whether he killed him or not must do penance for 40 days for each man he thus struck. Anyone who does not know the number of those he wounded or killed must, at the discretion of his bishop, do penance for 1 day in each week for the remainder of his life. Or, if he can, let him redeem his sin by a perpetual alms. The clerks who fought or were armed for fighting must do penance as if they had committed these sins in their own country. Now, the guilt wasn't just on those who fought. In 1155, during the siege of Tortona by Frederick Barbosa, the clergy of the city marched out of the city in solemn procession to declare all their political leaders to be guilty. There's lessons there. The idea of veteran as penitent has deep roots. And the idea of patient, we've heard in some of the songs about PTSD, is also commonplace. The veteran as patient has superseded the idea of veteran as penitent in our culture. Adjustment disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. This diagnosis has been criticized, rightfully, for pathologizing the veteran and exonerating the culture, the society, from their share of appropriate culpability. Joseph Tarantula, a psychiatrist, captures this critique well when he says, the function of the PTSD pseudo-diagnosis is that it gives voice as scapegoat to disowned parts of our national lament. The PTSD diagnosed veteran must hold both our shame and our guilt that we have become, we being citizens of these United States, the primary international killers, and our shame that we kill out of fear rather than noble cause. A new term has emerged out of the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I work: moral injury, a betrayal of what's right, perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to acts that violate our core values or beliefs. Gabrielle Latini at this year's General Assembly did a forum and spoke about moral injury as an injury to us all. I think she was accurate. This is not a wound that it is mine alone to carry. I recently earned a doctorate in ministry, and the focus of my research was on moral injury among veterans. And my project, which I executed in Philadelphia at the VA Medical Center, was a group. And I'll close just by reading to you the introduction to my doctoral work, my paper. It opens up new ways of seeing the role of veteran in our society, not as just penitent or patient, but as Mahedi said, a prophet. The U.S. wields the most powerful military in the history of the world and deploys military personnel throughout the globe to fight, kill, and die in armed conflict. U.S. veterans number around 22.5 million, or about 14% of the U.S. population. Some veterans troubled by violence enroll in the Veterans Health Administration. They receive care from mental health providers who have developed, through their particular framework, the medical constructs of PTSD and now moral injury, to diagnose or treat these veterans as patients. Yet the PTSD construct casts veterans as patients with a disorder. It minimizes legitimate moral pain. I mean, there are some things we ought to feel guilt about. And it enables the U.S. public to avoid the work of reckoning with the harmful consequences of U.S. military action, for which we hold ultimate responsibility. Moral injury holds out the possibility for prophetic critique. Moral injury occurs at the intersection of religion and violence and invites the contribution not just of chaplains, but of you, the religious community. In Philadelphia, I led a focused moral injury group for combat veterans. I co-facilitated with a psychologist, and it provided the veterans the opportunity for frame breaking and reframing of their self-identity from patient to prophet, and holds the possibility of systemic change in a response grounded not in individual therapy or treatment, but in shared spiritual and moral community. After the 10th week, the group leads a public ceremony with ritual and spiritual discipline, an opportunity for veterans to provide adaptive leadership as they transform themselves from patient to prophet, bearing witness to unsanitized and inglorious truths, while the U.S. public listens and wrestles with issues of culpability, obligation, and moral responsibility. The outcome is not a disorder, but rather post-traumatic growth, and we've measured this, not only among the veterans, but among the community, indicated by greater moral engagement, awareness, forgiveness of self and others, and compassion. And I hold out the hope that such adaptive change that we're leading in our small way at the VA Medical Center in Philadelphia may lead to an increased resistance to militarism and greater reverence for all life on this fragile earth. We have a song.
Hymn number 160, Far Too Long by Fear Divided. This may be an unfamiliar hymn to many of us, but we'll give it a try. Number 160. As you're able in spirit, let's rise as we sing.
This morning we have held in grateful memory Dottie Prunhuber. We have recalled great wisdom teachers, James Luther Adams, and his call for the prophethood of all believers, King Jr., and his call to be maladjusted to the madness of militarism. And we have invoked our Creating Peace statement of conscience. Let us find in these wisdom teachers and sources of our faith the strength to resist, to stand where we need to stand. So help us God.
Well, 7 years ago, I produced an album of songs about these issues called Until You Come Home, and last year we produced another compilation of songs about this very issue. And one of the most powerful songs I've ever heard hasn't been included because the man who wrote it died 9 years ago now. His name was Jim Hind. He was a veteran, a member of Veterans for Peace in Seattle, and he worked for many years with younger soldiers to help them get over their post-traumatic stress. And many veterans say we don't use the word disorder, post-traumatic stress. Sadly, he died at age 57 of a silent heart attack one night in bed. And he left this beautiful song called Frank, Dennis, and Me. I was 18 and change when the telephone rang, calling me to report to the sea. Vietnam War raged on every front page in the country. So I sailed to the war on a faraway shore, where boys no wiser than I, too young to vote and hoping too young to die. Serving time for the crime of being born American male, where sons become brothers in arms or brothers in jail. Or perhaps it was love, or the self-prescribed drugs, or the limbo of lost out at sea, sealing that line beyond reason and rhyme. Frank, Dennis, and me. Yeah, I recall the resorts, all the opium ports, but truth shines later in life. For the plight of the pawn fails greatly in the light of the king. How convenient is a God who would spare not the rod, send his only child to die at the hands of a power intent on only saving a life. I turned 21 years old, first coming home from the South China Sea, slapping paint on the rust of the sinking American dream. And did the home fires burn upon the hero's return? Was the red carpet rolled to the sea? Where was the parade when democracy was saved by Frank, Dennis, and me? Now I see in my son, where he'd have marched to the gun, how his soul would wither and die. Yeah, I know how that goes, far too long it's been happening to mine. May the damage done me by the powers that be never be done unto mine. And may the criminals and the foes be exposed by history and time. For Dennis and I swore that the Vietnam War will have ended at the moment when honor prevails and with justice demanded. All the names on the wall in the Washington Mall await the dead to return from the sea. But those veterans still dying a day at a time, with Frank, Dennis, and me. All the names on the wall in the Washington Mall await the dead to return from the sea. For those veterans still dying a day at a time, with Frank, Dennis, and me.